All right, good afternoon, everyone. Everyone hear me okay? Thanks for joining this last session of the last day today. And thanks very much to our friends at Zerto for inviting us to join them as part of this whole conference. The stuff that you've been hearing is quite exciting, and my hope today is to give you a little bit of insight into how some of the stuff that Zerto's been talking about will work with Exagrid's product, both in the past and in the future. Be happy to take questions. It's a small enough group as we go along, and then I'll allow some time at the end. Also, I will try to move through this so that you don't have to maybe get out a few minutes early on this nice sunny Boston day. So the topic today is indeed, how does Exagrid and Zerto together produce something that is both hyper-converged and hyper-available? My name is Tom Gillespie. I'm a director of application integration within Exagrid, meaning that I figure out how we work best with the various backup applications, vendors, and partners, and then also a role within product management as we steer the product forward with ourselves and also, again, with the various partners. Been with Exagrid a little over 10 years, so have seen the product really come along and then the various partnerships develop, which is quite exciting for us. Exagrid has, at this point, is the largest independent vendor in this whole deduplication appliance space. That is our product. It is with deduplication and replication, and fortunately, Gartner has recognized some of the architectural characteristics of our product that I'll go into in some of the slides ahead, and tacked us up there in the visionary quadrant, which is always a lot of fun. I mentioned we're 100% focused on this whole notion of sitting behind backup applications as a disk-based backup target with deduplication and with replication. The architectural that I'll cover in the next slides also translates into some nice industry recognition and, of course, benefit for customers. Over 10,000 systems installed. Those are 10,000 appliances. Many of our customers have multiple appliances at their site, and so this represents thousands of customers worldwide. One of the things that we've done is to get customer success stories up on our website, real-world descriptions of how Exagrid has solved one or more backup problems in their own words, and these are published. They agreed to do them, etc. So if you ever want to get a little bit more of a feel for what our customers are saying, we have put those up there. I won't highlight these awards too much, but again, we believe that the architecture has been recognized by the various industry folks and what they try to bring forward as value in a product solution. You'll see that we have customers in multiple vertical markets. We do not focus on any one particular vertical market. The one thing that a lot of these folks have in common is the fact that they needed longer-term retention of their backups. So these are large, multi-terabyte, long retention, but then leaders within their own vertical markets, and you recognize a bunch of the names. You'll hear that theme not only from my presentation in terms of the need for long-term retention, but obviously you're starting to hear it from Zerto as well, both in Rob's keynote today and the session I was in before. I wanted to highlight two, maybe three customer stories that represent how we have been working with Zerto so far, and then we'll touch a little bit, to the extent that I can, on how we would be working with Zerto going forward with the IT Resiliency and Zerto 7 that you heard about today. So there is a global finance and banking company, typical critical banking applications, large-scale VM deployment, uptime is key. You recognize this as it's Zerto's sweet spot, with large number of their own customers having to provide resiliency and availability with mandatory DR testing. And then here comes some of the common factors where Exagrid would be brought into play and would bring value associated with a longer a need for longer retention points. Specifically for these folks, it was the ability to roll back or get access to the previous, and we're talking months and years, way beyond a Zerto journal timeframe, in case of VM deletion, corruption, big need for access to the longer-term backups because of regulatory reasons and requirements, the legal discovery. You've no doubt heard those things and requirements before. We've also sold Exagrid to a multinational pharma organization. In this case, it was the FDA mandated retention periods for the backups. Very large data sets. You'll hear about our scale-out ability and our sort of pay-as-you-grow model, which fits very well with longer, not only the longer term, but the larger data sets. And then we've also done a joint customer story with, or a connection with a world-class hospital with their multiple clouds being provided by their Zerto implementation. But again, what did they need? They needed a long-term retention of backups for their many different applications associated with HIPAA compliance. Hopefully you see a theme here. Long-term retention, how am I going to do it? But how am I going to do it in a way that also provides me the capabilities that Zerto brings to the data protection and that critical VM and application protection. So this is what we've done so far between Exagrid and Zerto. You may be familiar with Zerto's ability to do offsite backups at the disaster recovery site. Just one more tab within your VPGs, click on it, and all of a sudden you're able to do longer term, quote unquote, offsite backups. That goes off to an Exagrid for the longer term retention. And that, again, long-term retention property is key because of Exagrid's ability to deduplicate those backups one after another, and demonstrate significant disk cost savings, as well as some architectural things that we'll talk about later. In addition, Exagrid supports other backup applications that can be used for, let's say, the non-tier 0 or tier 1 applications that you no doubt have in your enterprise already. And so the longer term retention coming from Zerto is happening at the disaster recovery site. The rest of your VMs at your primary data center are protected using whatever application you already have or might be switching to, because we work with over 20 backup applications. And then because we can do bidirectional replication, your less critical VM backups are replicated after they've been deduplicated, so it's very WAN efficient, off to the second site, Exagrid. And likewise, those Zerto offsite backups are sent back to the primary site to have a second copy and protection of those backups. So that's sort of a picture of what we've been doing in the past. The notion of long-term retention fits very well with what you heard about today, and we expect to be able to continue to work with Zerto in the integration of Zerto's backup abilities, new capabilities within Zerto version 7, and then the Exagrid appliance. One of the things that Exagrid has done is understood and tried to fix the economics of backup. So first, in terms of price protection, what the traditional backup storage, secondary storage vendors will often do is sell at a low price and then raise the price on future Right, wrong button. Raising the price. Exagrid fixes the price for all of your purchases. It's a price protection capability that we build right into the sales cycle early on. Maintenance dollars. 1 year support, and then it's hiked with the other vendors. Exagrid limits the increase in maintenance dollars to 3%. And in terms of maintenance percentage, and so it goes, and so it goes, and so it goes. Sorry. Careful that one button. And so when you look at these all together, We've really tried to understand, again, what the economics are of backup, what drives those things, and how we've done things differently all across the column there to bring you a better solution. So when you take a look at considerations for doing backups to secondary storage, a deduplication appliance like this, it's very typical. You've got a backup application of some sort. Really doesn't matter which one because the model is pretty much the same. And then you have some backup storage that you're using to keep those backups. Everybody has recognized at this point that backup is a great kind of data stream for deduplication. You're sending your same backups every day, every week, every month. And so an appliance or a technology that can look at the differences and squeeze out and keep only the differences is really a requirement at this point. And then as a result of that, you only have to replicate the changes. Very bandwidth efficient, so it's a nice replication story as well. However, there are other considerations for your backup storage. First of all, you're always concerned about ingest and backup windows. It's just a requirement. It's part of backup. Backup is only good as you restore, and your ability these days to not only do quick restores, but also boot your VM from backups and other technologies that recognize that this backup is kept on disk, and I want to be able to take full advantage of the speed of disk without having to have deduplication get in the way of that. And as a result, and you put this all together, the other final consideration is associated with knowing that your backup window is going to be fixed, despite the fact that backup data sizes grow because they always will. And so if you don't take into account how am I going to grow in the future when my backup data grows, you can run into issues where your backup window is back in trouble again. So this is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sort of set of considerations. And then I've got 3 slides that cover first, what did we do about this number 3 problem or consideration for fastest ingest? What did we do about number 4 for fastest restores and boots? And then what did we do about number 5? These are 3 architectural properties of the product that obviously are in green here, but are meant to solve some of the problems associated with other deduplication solutions. First of all is this notion of fastest backups and shortest backup window. All of the other deduplication products will take the approach of doing the deduplication work as the data lands, as it comes in, often called inline. Deduplication is a very intensive process, and so there's a number of steps that have to happen, and as a result, you have to take that effect or that impact into account as the backups are coming in. Exagrid takes a very different approach. We do not do inline. We allow the backup to land directly on a portion of our appliance that is a high-speed disk cache. We call it the landing zone because that's where backups land. And then we do the deduplication as system resources allow over time. But the backup is made a priority, and the ingest rates associated with the Exagrid product, and you'll see a few slides on this, really show up as much stronger and as a result, much better, much shorter backup windows. This also means that, in effect, because of the deduplication processing going on in parallel with backups landing, you are able to achieve some of the strongest offsite RPOs when using Exagrid replication. The inline can slow down your backups and reduce the ingest rate, again, some slides on that later, such that when you take a 2-3 hour backup window into account, Exagrid will actually complete the deduplication and the replication of that backup to a second site more quickly, sooner than an inline approach. So consideration number 3, what happens when I go to restore? Well, with an inline solution on the left there in red, you have to put all of that back together. Of course, we call it rehydration before you can access any single piece of your data. With Exagrid, because the backup landed in that high-speed disk cache, and we size our system to have approximately a week or more of your most recent backups still sitting there in cache, 90+% of the time, you're going to be restoring your most recent backups, and there they are, sitting on disk. No need to rehydrate them. Fastest restores for VM boots and tape copies and any other access to your backups, which is obviously the most important property when it comes to considerations for your backup story. It's great if it goes in fast, but if I can't get to it quickly, my business is impacted. And then the last consideration is associated with wanting to know that you have your backup window under control not only today, but also tomorrow. And if you look at some of the scale-up architecture implementations, you may start off with enough horsepower in a single front-end controller. Again, deduplication is a very processor-intensive operation, compute-intensive operation, to keep up with, say, 63 terabytes of incoming backups within your window. And then you start to grow, of course, and go up to 126 terabytes. That single controller is working a little bit harder, and you're starting to get into sort of trouble. But finally, when you get to very larger sizes of growth within your backup application, you might have to bring in the forklift, throw the stuff out. That was painful. I just paid a lot of thousands of dollars for that stuff, but I can't use it anymore. I have to throw it out, bring in the next largest model that has more processor and ability to do deduplication. This is very much a scale-up architecture. Classic architecture in the primary storage, SAN-based single controller, just add disk story. We felt there was a better way to utilize a grid architecture, hence the name, where every time you grow your backup secondary storage with Exagrid, you're bringing in a whole new set of compute, memory, network, and of course the storage. And as a result, as your backup workload grows, you have additional horsepower to keep up with those workloads. And as a result, no matter how much you grow, all the way up to a 2 petabyte system is the largest Exagrid configuration, you can maintain that backup window. Okay. There we go. All right, so what does this mean in practice? If you take a look at the Exagrid, one of our appliances that are combined up to 32 together to produce that 2 petabyte scale-out system, this is the ingest performance graph compared to a certain DD product. And you can see that at each one of these points, we're talking about a forklift kind of operation. You have to throw this one out in order to keep up because you need a larger model, a larger model, a larger model. And Exagrid, you can pay as you grow linearly all the way up to the maximum configuration. So again, we think it's a much better architecture and economics of backup story. When it comes to the replication, we have multiple different options. The most common being a second Exagrid appliance is purchased and put at your own second data center. You already have it, you already have bandwidth, you just plug in an Exagrid at a second location. They talk to each other, WAN efficient because we're only sending the changes. You can also do a private cloud sort of configuration where you purchase an Exagrid, install it at a co-location, so you don't have to have and run the second data center. We have a hybrid cloud solution where a number of our partners will actually purchase Exagrid and sell it back to you at a gigabyte per month sort of OpEx model. And then finally, we do have the ability to run an Exagrid appliance, if you will, the Exagrid software within the public cloud. Currently, these are sort of the universe of backup applications and also the disaster recovery applications. We also support what we can call an application direct, where without a backup application, the various database products have the ability to send backups directly to Exagrid without an intervening backup application, and then some utilities around the Linux space. This is a map of our ecosystem partners. In all cases, again, you're going to find that we partner and jointly sell with these providers of technology when the customer needs long-term retention of sizable backups. So that story is common, again, across all of those. And with the IT resilience platform emerging, as you heard today, we're anxious to continue to develop that system, that ecosystem with our friends at Zerto. So in terms of the Exagrid appliance itself, just a brief summary of why we call this a stress-free backup appliance and stress-free redundancy and security. Inside RAID 6 with industry standard sort of performing RAID cards, hot spare drive so you can have multiple disk failures, redundant power supplies, the NIC teaming. We've done all of that appliance engineering that can make a difference in terms of just setting, forgetting, and knowing that your backups are going to continue to run. In terms of some security aspects, we do offer a data encryption at rest version of our product where we actually do the encryption within the disk drives themselves, courtesy of these standard properties. We also will do encryption of the replication data across the WAN for additional security. We have a different Exagrid customer support model that I wanted to mention where as a Exagrid customer, you're assigned a level 2 support engineer. We have no level 1 support engineers. They get to know your, not only your environment, but they're knowledgeable about your particular backup application. As a result, the conversation can go very quickly when an issue arises because the support engineer is already familiar with your environment, has already talked to you in the past, and you can get right down to business of what's going on. Our product is fully self-installable. You get on the phone with a support engineer just to talk through it, but this is not a heavyweight deployment. And we do offer either self-service replacements or services that will come in and do the hardware replacements should you desire. We include all of the new features as part of our regular maintenance and support schedule. No additional license fees when new features come out. We're trying to keep this as simple and as economical as possible. We do have a health status monitoring capabilities, sort of a phone home, where we're able to spot trends on the Exagrid and, yes, indeed, have one of our sales folks give you a call and say, hey, I noticed you're filling up. It's probably time to buy a little bit more. So between the landing zone with that high-speed disk cache for ingest and fast restores, scale-out ability, pay-as-you-grow, keep up with that backup window without forklift upgrades, a world-class support that takes a very different approach, and also lowest cost, cost-effective solutions. That's sort of all of the quadrants within the Exagrid story. So any questions at this point? I'll toss those out. Yes, sir.
So I got a couple, but when you say that you can get the VM back and working right from your device, what are you presenting? NFS or something?
That tends to be the responsibility of the backup application as it's reading from its native backup format on the Exagrid storage, but then indeed presenting probably an NFS mount that they've provisioned and injected within your hypervisor such that, yes, you can power that thing on. The backup application is acting as an NFS server, but ultimately is reading from the backup storage. The Exagrid landing zone is very instrumental in that because, again, it's coming from a high-speed disk cache, no rehydration penalty. Yeah, sure.
I noticed that you had Nutanix and Pure up there. What's the integration there?
They represent sources of long-term backup. Yeah, sources of long-term backups in their own ecosystem, et cetera. Because we don't have a backup application, we are backup storage with the properties that I talked about. We can indeed sit behind, pretty much anything that is producing backups where you need to keep them for longer term retention.
So is this a type of replication out of Nutanix that goes to Exagrid?
No, there are a number of backup applications, backups themselves, backup applications that support Nutanix now.
Okay.
And we are happy to sit behind those backup applications, take in their backup streams for, again, the longer term retention, but also the restorability associated with the landing zone.
Okay, so you do need some sort of software
Yes.
in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
in those cases, the backup application is something that you're free to choose, best of breed, and then you would choose based upon the characteristics of your environment, but you would then use that, configure it with Nutanix, be it their own hypervisor, be it VMware. There's lots of different choices there. The good news is that we can take all of that in through the interfaces that we support, et cetera. So even as we used to sort of smile and laugh when people talked about changing their backup applications, right? Nobody did that. It was too much work. Seems to be happening more and more as the backup applications come along with best of breed and as the technology behind them that they're having to back up is changing. Good news there is you're able to sort of change the backup application, but keep your backup storage infrastructure as Exagrid and know that we're going to be able to work with whatever backup application comes along. We have lots of customers that are doing, a couple hundred terabytes worth of net backup today, but then a whole bunch more of Zerto, and it's slowly marching away from net backup to Zerto sort of thing. And the good news is Exagrid is there in both cases. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that you are capable of recovering a virtual machine from within your storage.
Yes.
So in the case of that virtual machine being a database, let's say an Oracle database, how do you ensure the consistency of the data?
Sure. So I'll answer that question in terms of Zerto. It would probably be different in some of the other backup applications that we support. But in the case of Zerto, Zerto's offsite backups are designed and deliberately implemented to be completely self-contained. So all of the things in your VPG that your VPG knows about, which VMs, which network settings, all of those things that give you that really nice grouping associated with the VPG, those are all captured in the Zerto offsite backup. And so all you have to do is tell Zerto, hey, here's an offsite backup, and it knows how to read that format associated with a VPG, all of the VMs, all of the networking, and gives you that same crash level consistency within the VMs, within your VPG that you're used to doing, say, within the journal.
Okay, thank you.
Did that answer the question? Okay. Yes, sir.
So we're using an Exagrid, 2 Exagrids currently.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're currently using Zerto for disaster recovery.
Yep.
But we are still using Veeam
Yep.
for traditional backups.
Yep.
I'm interested in the functionality or the benefit of moving to Zerto
Yep.
with the integration to Exagrid versus using Veeam in the current version and in version 7.
Hoo-hoo, yeah. So the good news is you can stick with Exagrid in either solution or whatever you pick and choose, and it will work with both. I can tell you what we're finding more and more is that when you need Zerto, right? And so there's a whole tier of your applications where you can't live without Zerto because of what it provides in those cases. If you need to back those up for the longer retention, again, associated with regulatory requirements, doing that via the Zerto offsite backup saves you from also having to back up those same VMs, say with a Veeam, to achieve or to just achieve the longer term retention that you need. For the rest of the virtual machines that are not Zerto tier class virtual machines, you still need some level of data protection associated with them. So Veeam provides a good solution with that. There are legacy backup applications when you still have physical machines, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't think it's so much today amongst customers as an either or, but as an and. Now, how that will change as Zerto 7 climbs into the whole backup within one space. I think their message is very attractive and very powerful. How that will change and eliminate other second backup applications, we'll have to see. The good news is because, if you recall on that ecosystem slide, we're sort of cozying up to all of those ecosystem partners. We will be providing the sort of best interoperability. I didn't talk a lot about Veeam because that wouldn't be fair, but for instance, we've done some integrations with Veeam before. I'm very much looking forward to continuing the discussions with Zerto about the integrations with Zerto 7, the backup space, and Exagrid. They happen to toss up the HPE Catalyst integration. Wouldn't it be nice if there was a similar level of integration? And that's what we're going to be about, and we have until Q1 2019 to bring that to reality. So, good question. I hope I answered that without too much spin. Yes, sir.
So, what would be, you say that one of the main advantages of this solution is the long-term
Yes.
Retention.
Cost-effective long-term retention, yes.
So what would be the normal life cycle of your product? I mean, in the event of requiring, let's say, if you have usually you buy hardware with support for 4 years, you can consider that the life of your hardware. If your retention is longer than 4 years,
Yeah, what do you do?
usually happens.
Yeah.
So what is the solution that you
Great.
can take?
We have never end-of-lifed a product. I know that sounds a little weird, but our very first model was capable of taking in 1 terabyte of weekly backup, retaining it for 16 weeks. That was a whole bunch of years ago. We still support that product. We don't actively sell it because the density is so low, but we still actively support it. We have not end-of-lifed it. You can get maintenance and support. The current software runs on it, et cetera, all the way up to our current largest model, which will take in 63 terabytes of weekly backup retained for 16 weeks. You put 2 of them together, you get 126, and you get the scale-out story. We have not end-of-lifed a model ever.
Well, my question was more towards finding out, I mean, you don't, you still support that part, but from the client point of view, it might be not worth anymore to have such a device on
Sure.
the premises. So what is the solution that you offer
Sure.
to that?
So we do offer essentially a trade-in program where if you get to the point where your backup has continued to grow to the point where you would like to bring in some more higher density devices, swap out the old ones for some higher density devices, we offer not only a sales, we'll basically give you some credit for some of the older devices, but we have the ability to migrate the backups from the going away devices in the grid to the new devices in the grid. We'll rebalance it across it, et cetera. So your long-term retention, your long-term retained backups will continue and your investment in those continue. You get to decide when you want to do that trade-in, when you want to consolidate to improve your density. It's not forced upon you because all of a sudden your backup window is taking longer and longer and you have to forklift to the larger model.
Well, another concern that I have regarding this is that you rely on third-party applications to
Yep.
create the backup. So
Yep.
even though you still support your first system, we have, as clients, encounter the problem of we need to replace our applications,
Sure.
our backup applications. So do you also have a solution for that?
We're still dependent upon the backup application to read the backups. Even if they've been retained for 5 years, 7 years, you still need, yes, a version of the backup software that can read that particular backup. Fortunately, in this size of backups and this quantity of retention, meaning enterprise-sized customers, the backup applications that are used will generally have a pretty long end-of-life story for them, and it's just the reality within the backup world. Hopefully Zerto's IT resilience and Zerto 7 will continue to improve upon that, right?
Okay, and going back to my first question, which you more or less answered. I still have the concern of Zerto is capable of replicating the drives within the virtual machine. So what happens to an application that use an extended amount of memory to load data and work with it, and you have to do a commit to write that information to disk in order to have it backed up?
All of the issues associated with making sure your applications come up through the journal are exactly the same when they would be coming up from a longer term offsite backup. The two are sort of connected. You're seeing that in Zerto 7, that journal will become more elastic and will sort of embrace the longer ones. The offsite backups are a little bit sort of outside the journal today, but the technology is the same, such that the offsite backup has everything it needs to bring that entire VPG back.
Okay, thank you.
So I'll add from the Zerto perspective, if you don't mind, the checkpoint, how we create the checkpoint consistency. So it doesn't change. It is a checkpoint, whether it's a short-term journal, a long-term journal, or in the current version, Zerto 6, the offsite backups are outside of the journal. But basically, there are ways to create them consistent. We have best practices for that, the application-specific best practices. So just work with our sales engineers, and they can help you create application-consistent checkpoints, and that will be across multiple VMs, of course, in the VPG, and that will alleviate the point that you're making of items being in memory not being captured because they're not on disk.
Sure. Thank you. Zerto to the rescue. Yes, sir.
So it was mentioned in the previous session that that Zerto 7 will support worm backups. Is there a move inside the Exagrid itself to support by protecting backups and making sure they can't be changed over time?
There is nothing in the Exagrid software today that sort of provides that air gap or that don't overwrite it, et cetera. To date, we've been relying pretty much upon backup applications to offer that functionality. To the extent that they do, it sort of continues to just work. But I appreciate that from a product management standpoint, the need to just be really, 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 really sure grows every day, right? So,
Because somebody could still log into the Exagrid directly and delete the files.
Sure.
And that would mess up everything.
well, you would have to gain share access. So you would have to have access to the actual data shares themselves. If you got into the administrative interface, there are some limits. But yes, that sort of whole, how are you going to provide the extra level of either security or air gap or protection? Because that you're looking at your backups as your last stand, right? You want to protect them.
Thank you.
All right, so I'm going to give you 7 minutes back, and again, appreciate the time, and have a good rest of the day.